Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The title is The Effectiveness of Using Google Point as Media in Teaching Reading Comprehension of Narrative Text to Students with Different Learning Styles. Presented by me, Siska Widyasari. Background. Reading is a process of thinking to find out meaning, information, or other messages as being attained by the author through his or her writing. When people reading, they will automatically think about the content. In reaching those aims, the teacher should do their efforts. One of the efforts can be done by the teacher is to develop their techniques of teaching reading in every level of education, especially in senior high school. Learning style is also a conceptual structure which refers to the individual's learning characteristics on the basis of individual differences in learning. Students learn in many different ways: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning style. Students with different sensory learning style have distinct ways they prefer to learn and areas where they will have difficulty learning. When the writer applied Google Point in teaching learning process at the SMK Ma'arif and Ukajen in the 10th grade students, there were some students who looked excited and they followed the teaching learning process enthusiastically. After the data were collected from the test, the writer gave score to the students' work. Based on the explanation above, the writer is motivated to conduct research with title The Effectiveness of Using Google Point as Media in Teaching Reading Comprehension of Narrative Text to Students with Different Learning Style. Research problem. Number 1. How is the effectiveness of Google Point as media in teaching reading comprehension to students with different learning styles? Number 2. What is the most dominant student learning styles using Google Point as media in the learning process? Setting. The writer conducted this research at the 10th grade student of SMK Ma'arif and Ukajen in academic year 2020-2021. The location of the school is on Pahlawan Street, Rawalaku, Kajen, Pekalongan 51161. The writer conducted 3 meetings in each control and experiment class. Yet, before doing the research, the writer did try out firstly in 10th grade of 10 TKR 1 of SMK Ma'arif and Ukajen. Population and samples. The population of this research was all of the 10th graders. There were 88 students. The writer divided 2 classes into the control class and the experiment class. The sample of this study consists of 70 students, which were 10 TKR2 as the experiment class and 10 AKL1 as the control class. Method. This study was designed in true experimental design. In true experimental design, the writer randomly assigned 1 subject from each pair to the experimental group and the other subject to the control group. This study was conducted in descriptive quantitative research. This research was to get the statistical data, since the goal to know how the effectiveness of Google Point as media to teach reading comprehension. The research instrument used was test. The techniques of data collection were giving pretest in the first meeting, giving material in the second meeting, and giving post-test in the last meeting. Result and discussion. diagram of pre-test and post-test both of the class. Based on the diagram, it showed that average pre-test of the experimental class was 6140 and the control class was 6120. It means that the average of control class was lower than the experimental class. The average post-test of the experimental class was 7590 and the control class was 7230. It means that the average of experimental class was higher than the control class. In other words, the implementation of Google Point was effective to teach reading comprehension at 10th grade of SMK Ma'arif NU Kajen. The writer calculated the number of students' learning style to distinguish each student. In calculating, the writer employed the following formula: percentage of each type of learning style, total of student learning style, total of whole student. Based on the table before, the results showed students tend to study with various kinds of learning style. There were 45% or 9 students are visual learner, 20% or 4 students are auditory learner, and 35% or 7 students are kinesthetic learner. The result of interview above, the writer concludes that learning style on students gives some benefits for students to learn better in their ways in learning English learning. After the student know what type of their learning style, the student got some benefits. There were 3 types of student learning style found by the writer. There are visual learner, auditory learner, and kinesthetic learner. In this research, the writer classified based on the characteristic of learning styles. From the result of data, it can be seen that most of student learning style are visual learner. In the visual learning style, the students have some characteristics as follows. They prefer to read than to listen. They prefer to remember the instruction when it was written. They prefer to remember what they see than what they hear. Based on explanation above, the writer concludes that there was a significant difference in students after given the treatment, and Google Point is effective to teach reading comprehension at 10th grade of SMK Ma'arif NU Kajen in academic year 2020-2021. Conclusion and suggestion. Conclusion. From the result of the research, the writer can conclude that the dominant learning style in student reading proficiency is a visual learning style. There is significant difference between students who taught using Google Point and the students who are taught using grammar translation method. The students who were taught using Google Point have better comprehension in reading narrative text than the students who were taught grammar translation method. Furthermore, the result of the study showed that the T-score of reading comprehension was 5.813 greater than 2.018. T-table at 5% SIG level and degree of freedom 42 and had SIG two-tailed score of 0.000 smaller than 0.05. Suggestion. From the conclusion above, the writer would like to give suggestion as follows. The students should participate in discussion. Then they can share difficulties or problems to each other, also in solving their problems to build and keep a good teamwork as taught in Google Point. As a facilitator, the teacher should help students in solving their difficulties and problems. The student must have high confidence to use many new vocabulary when giving opinion about tests. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.